So we will go ahead and get started. I will allow our panelists to quickly say their names, but I'm Alden Landry. I'm an emergency medicine physician at BI and the Assistant Dean for Diversity and Inclusion and Community Partnership at Harvard Medical School.
Teresa Smith, the Associate Dean of GME and the DIO at SUNY Downstate Health Sciences University in Kings County in Brooklyn, New York.
Jeff Schneider, ED faculty at Boston Medical Center. I'm also the DIO, an assistant dean, and then the associate CMO as well.
And so, we were asked to come and present on enacting an anti-racist structural change at the GME level. But I think the conversation that we all had within our prep meetings as we were preparing for this conversation is going not just at the GME level, but really thinking about this from an institutional level, so above the educational component of it, and thinking about what systems level changes can happen, and even more in our conversations about what interactions and what changes can happen when we think about this from a field of emergency medicine. So how do we go beyond just the spaces and the places that we work? Now, you will see in our presentation, we do anchor a lot on our institutions and talk about our lived experiences in the work environments that we're in and the small victories that we've been able to have. And also, we're going to try and share some stories about the challenges that we've incurred over the past few years. But I think that this morning, all of the presentations were absolutely phenomenal. I think it was a great lead into some of the conversations that we were going to have during the course of this next hour. Now, one thing I would like to say is we were all commenting on the last discussion around community engagement and how important that was. But with two DIOs in this space and me with community partnership as part of my title at my institution, one of the things that we recognized is we are making the assumption that this is valued by all when it's truly only valued by some. And so the real question is, how do you make this so these issues are truly valued by all? And so one of the conversations we were having, and we were thinking about this, particularly when it comes to community engagement, is in this space where we have a program director who's saying, I need my residents to get 20 deliveries on their OB rotation. I need them to have X number of central lines. I need them to know how to do a certain number of pigtail chest tubes. I need them to meet these numbers and these metrics. That is what program directors are going to value. They are going to value what is expected of them from an ACGME level. And so the conversation we were having was, how do we change the system so that it has to become important to the program directors and the departments because it is now valued by the organization that accredits them. And so that's the mindset that we all need to be thinking about some of this work. We're trying to pull on, heartstrings to tell people these things are important. But when you challenge people by saying you have to make a structural change to your program and make it so that these things are valued from an accrediting body, these things are valued because we think they are important for the field of emergency medicine, then program directors, department chairs, and other leadership within the institution will say, you know what, this is valued, and this is what I'm going to be judged upon. Therefore, I need to make sure that this is a part of the curriculum that my trainees have going forward. So that is the perspective that we want to lead into this conversation, changing it from just a conversation about how do we get people to care about these things, but how do we make them value the issues that we think are important. And so with that, I will turn it over to Teresa, who's going to lead us through our first section.
So, a part of what Alden is saying is we want this to be a conversation. I believe you guys started the day saying this is a safe space. So we're going to talk about a lot of topics and issues that can be very sensitive, but hopefully you all will allow us to engage us so that we learn from each other's mistakes. I think a lot of what we were talking about earlier today, people were talking about the mistakes that their programs made, and then hopefully in that we can all learn from each other. So let's start off by what's a social determinant of health? Anyone raise your hand. What's a social determinant of health? What does it actually mean?
It can be either a social or cultural aspect that can either positively or negatively affect your health outcomes. Homelessness or race, ethnicity, some kind of cultural.
All right, so something in your social environment that impacts your health outcome. There's somebody over here.
It's not just a social environment, it's your geographic environment, economic environment too.
Right, so your geographic environment that again impacts your health. So the CDC says a social determinant of health is conditions in places where people live, learn, work, and play that impacts a wide range of their health risk and outcome. Right? So when we think about it, when we think about social determinants of health, we usually are thinking about these 5 different areas, right? access to and quality of healthcare, access to and quality of education, economic stability, and then your environment, right? Whether it's your built environment, the neighborhoods that you're in. Now, if any of you recently went to the ACGME conference, one of the plenary speakers was a woman by the name of Holly Humphrey. She's actually the president of the Josiah Macy's Foundation. And she talks about an article that recently came out looking at the social determinants of medical education, which I think is extremely pertinent for us when we're talking about how can the institutions really look at the underrepresented in medicine and medical education. Looking at it the same way you look at it, the social determinants of health, right? So I'm going to break these down a little bit because I think that they're important and they'll really direct us in the rest of our conversation. So when you look at education, right? So starting with medical education, a lot of people are talking about pipeline programs, which we should actually probably be calling pathway programs. Thank you. Right? So going all the way back, we had a nice little discussion in the back about these scholarships that we offer in many of our clerkship scholarships to get underrepresented in medicine to see our institutions. But let's go even further back from that to really set the context of what it is like to be an underrepresented in medicine trainee. Imagine all the hurdles that you actually have to get through. Now, it actually starts clearly from slavery and way back, but even bringing it maybe to the 19th century and saying the Flexner Report, right? Flexner, who's actually set our standards for much of medical education. And one of the things that he said is that African-American physicians shouldn't be studying surgery. They should be studying hygiene because their hygiene is very horrible. And he goes into all these horrible other things that he says that are clearly racist, but they were depicted at the time. But he is actually the foundation of what much of medical education is about. And then looking at the school systems that many of our residents have to come from, right? And does your school system look the same as, another person's school system who's coming from the south side of Chicago? And imagining the hurdles that they have to go through to even get to college. Then having to pay for college. Did many of your parents have set aside, money to pay for your college tuition, or did many of you have to work through to get to college tuition and incur a lot of debt, right? And then imagining having to get into medical school without no one in your family having gone through medical school before, you not knowing your way, finally figuring out what the applications are, how do you look good on your MCAT applications, what community service you need to do, finally getting into residency, right? Fast forwarding. All of the hurdles that this individual had to get to maybe not, everyone in this room at this point, whether you were privileged before, maybe you weren't privileged before, but now you are privileged. Now your children won't have to go through those same hurdles that you had to go through. Now that next generation will be like some of our other residents who were standing alongside who may have had it a little bit easier to getting into residency, whose parents maybe, were doctors before. That is a social determinant of medical education. Then looking at well-being and the access to, mental health services, or, again, the neighborhoods, where they can afford, where the residents can afford to live. Some of our residents do not live in the greatest of neighborhoods, and, the loud noises or the danger that they have to live in to then get to work and function every day. Then the support systems, mentorship, sponsorship. Not every UIM resident has the, appropriate amount of mentorship or sponsorship. And then again, economic stability. And I just talked about an example of how, many residents, honestly, whether they're UIM or not, have had to struggle to be able to get to residency. But then thinking about all of the loan indebtedness that they have incurred up until that point. That is a huge burden, and it truly does impact your training, right? Imagine carrying all of this weight behind you and then still having to come into work every day and perform just like everyone else. And so that's what we should be really thinking about when we think about the social determinants of medical education. That's what you should be thinking about when you see your learners who identify as other, UIM or LGBTQIA, who are having these huge burdens and bags that they're carrying into their training and still trying to perform just like everyone else. At the same conference, the ACGME conference, which was actually just about last month, there were two wonderful physicians who were coming from internal medicine who really talked about some of the structural barriers that patients actually have to face. But again, I want us to not only think about the patients, but our learners in the same context. And they talked about, it was Dr. Hussein and Dr. Scott from Montefiore in the Bronx. They talked about structural competency. And again, allow me to read this. Structural competency is the ability of physicians, that is faculty and trainees, to discern how downstream issues such as symptoms, attitudes, and diseases are influenced by upstream social determinants of health, such as healthcare, food delivery systems, zoning laws, urban and rural infrastructure, and medicalization. Now, if you take that same context, right, that same concept, and think about some of the upstream things that some of our learners have to deal with, so that's bias in evaluation, right? A lot of our evaluation is not objective, it's subjective. Particularly, giving one specific example, many females get evaluated based on characteristics. She's too shy, she needs to speak up, she's very mild-mannered instead of their actual merit. She did an excellent job running that code, right? So the bias that exists in evaluation, the daily microaggressions or macroaggressions that many of our trainees have to face, safety and quality in housing. Again, I talked about some of that in the loan indebtedness that maybe allows them to carry a lot of loan debt and not be able to live in the safest of neighborhoods. And then access to mental health providers, right? All of these upstream issues that our learners have to then, again, carry into their training programs, continue to be able to perform without anybody knowing all of these things that actually exist in their environment that they're struggling through, then to be rated on their clinical performance. So just, knowing all the upstream things, the social determinants of medical education that then impact the actual outcome of training. It's really important for you all, as you go into your programs, to make sure you're setting the tone. I think we had this discussion about how do you get your faculty to understand and to buy into some of these things. You make it relatable, right? You make them understand it in other contexts of our patients, because in fact, we are human beings, right? We are in fact patients. So with that in mind, a lot of what we're gonna be discussing is how can the systems help UIM trainees thrive? So we'll talk a little about educating our faculty, building communities, investigating bias and remediation and some of these upstream consequences, and then destigmatizing and creating greater access to mental health care.
So, and I just want to jump in on a point that was just made, going back to educating faculty and talking about the bias that goes into the literature. The bias that goes into evaluations in the literature that's out there. And one of the unique approaches I saw to an institution take to address this issue is what they did was within each evaluation at the very top, they had links to the literature that talked about bias in evaluations. And so the first thing that every faculty member saw before they were able to do an evaluation was the documentation about the literature. What is out there that says that there is bias in evaluations? And when the faculty member then submitted the evaluation, they were actually, there were some smart things that happened from a computer aspect where they used some word analysis where they looked at what words were put into the evaluations for their trainees that they evaluated. And they did sort of a mini QA project on this so that faculty members actually got feedback on the evaluations that they were providing. Now, it did put faculty members in some degree in a little bit of an uncomfortable spot, but it did help to change the process, change the way that people thought about this. And I think that's what Teresa was trying to emphasize is we need to make sure that we're not just doing this and without actually convincing people and helping people understand why this matters. So I'm briefly going to talk about thriving and training, retaining in academic medicine and being intentional. But I'm actually going to start off with a story. And I want you to picture a young Alden. I hate referring to myself in the third person, but picture me as a fourth-year medical student applying to residency. And just so you know, I have been relatively outspoken in issues related to diversity and inclusion for a fairly long time. This is something I actually wrote about in my personal statement in applying to medical school. I talked about health disparities. I talked about lack of diversity in medicine. And so this is something that I, like many of you in this room, has really felt passionate about. And I felt that this is part of the calling into my career into medicine. And when I was applying to residency program, I had that same fervor and that same interest. But for a number of reasons, I was geographically specific on where I was applying to residency. And when I was going around the Northeast applying to residencies, I would ask every program director, well, what is your department doing for diversity? Now, keep in mind, this isn't 2020 where we're having these issues related to everything that's happened in our country, this reawakening, quote unquote, after the murder of George Floyd and so many other individuals that we've seen on camera, the disparities we've seen play out in COVID. This was back in the early 2000s where there were other issues that were on the table, but we weren't talking about race and racism the same way that we are now. And so I would ask program directors, what are you doing when it comes to your diversity within your residency program? And that was my question for program directors. And this is the comment that I received. You're asking me to make steak out of hamburger. So how do you think that would make a young applicant to residency feel about that residency program?
Yeah, on to the next one.
On to the next one, right? Would anybody want to come to a program if this is what the reply from the program director was? And you could chop this up in a lot of ways. You could look at this and say, who is he trying to demean, or who is he saying is steak? Right? Who is the high quality and what is it? And so for me, this was something that rang true to me, and I held on to this quote for years. And I'm, as I mentioned, I'm an antagonist, and now I get to use this quote. I get to use this quote to program directors when I educate them, when I have these conversations around workforce diversity, right? Because this is the mentality that existed in 2005 when I was applying to residency. And this is the mentality of some of our program directors and department chairs that exist today. And shockingly, would you all believe that this person who made this comment to me is still a program director? And so what do you think that means to the residency program that they're responsible for? What do you think it means for the trainees that come in from diverse backgrounds and how they're valued, how they appreciate their experience while they're there? Now, I don't say this to attack the residency director who made this comment to me. I say this to say that there is a thought process that devalues certain attributes of trainees in favor of others. And I think Teresa really laid it out with her discussion around the social determinants of health, social determinants of medical education in her presentation, in her component of this. Because I think if you carry over some of those understandings of why these are valued, then some of those issues that are valued, then you won't have program directors who are making this statement. And I also want to bring this up because we have to think about who is in charge of our departments and our residency programs and who serve as our DIOs. Not to call out DIOs, not to call out department chairs and program directors, but I think there is an old guard that is still in place that probably needs to move on to their next phase of their career because they still hold on to these beliefs. And if this comment was made today, would this program director continue to be in their role?
You should call them out.
I will.
Should.
I will. I've had other opportunities where I know this program director has actually seen this slide.
Good.
If there's one thing I appreciate is a nice, subtle dig and a touch of petty. And so I want to bring this to, again, taking this to the macro level, thinking about the institutions, right? And so hopefully I still have it up on my phone. But I wanted to read to you all the mission statement of Harvard Medical School. And it says, Harvard Medical School is committed to convening and nurturing a diverse community of individuals dedicated to promoting excellence in leadership in medicine and science through education, research, clinical care, and service. So this is the mission statement of the institution that I work at. And along with this mission statement, there is a diversity statement, which rings through with a similar tone and tenor, talking about the value of diversity, the need for inclusion, the goal for making sure that people feel like they belong, and engaging the community so that we are not just that ivory tower that people often think of us as. And beyond that came the next step, which is the Better Together plan. And the Better Together plan is really a four-phase level of interventions to really think about what we are doing as an institution to engage in the community, to make sure our community feels as if they receive some of the benefits that Harvard so richly gains from the community, so that there's a two-way flow of resources, information, and health, that we think about who gets to benefit from our institution, so that we aren't just thinking about those individuals who are coming from other affluent backgrounds, who've had educational opportunities, that even those individuals who are right here in the city of Boston may not have had the same opportunities. And so I really think it's important for us to think about what is structured in place for the institution in order to make all of these interventions that we've been talking about throughout the morning, and all the conversations that you're going to hear through the rest of SAEM to talk about how this needs to be changed in programmatic shifts and whatnot. If you don't have the structure, if you don't have the pillars, if this isn't built into the core of your institution, then you're not going to get anywhere. And so within this, one of the things that I'm now leading at my institution is our diversity inclusion action plans. I actually lead a committee, and it's called the IDEA Committee. And everybody has an IDEA committee at their institution, it seems like. Ours stands for inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility. And one of the things that we are tasked with as an institution is to take the diversity action plans from different departments. This is more quad-based at Harvard Medical School. But what are the different departments doing on the quad that are specific to the Better Together plan and those 4 tenets that HMS is focusing on when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion? What are those departments doing, and how can we be a resource for them to do better? And now, right now, it's in a supportive perspective that the departments come to the committee for support. But in the future, this is going to be a committee that has some regulatory roles. And so we are going to be critically evaluating the work that is being done at each department and saying, this is where you need to improve upon, with expectations for those leaders of those departments to say, in 3 years, you need to be here. In 5 years, you need to be here. And have an understanding that this is going to be tracked. We're going to have metrics. We're going to follow the data. And we're going to look at your professional growth. Now, I know we've talked about visiting clerkship programs and opportunities for individuals to engage within our systems. And what I have seen as of late is a lot of money being thrown at these issues, but it's relatively short-sighted. And I'm not trying to hype the program that I was a part of called the Visiting Clerkship Program, but I really want to emphasize that there is a need for longitudinal investment in these efforts. And so it's not just about throwing short-term money thinking that you're going to fix diversity within your department in a matter of 2 or 3 years if you offer 5 scholarships a year. How are you going to make sure that the program has longitudinal investment, and that this is seen as a pillar within the institution? So we've had the Visiting Clerkship Program for over 31 years at Harvard Medical School. Ours is not limited to just emergency medicine, and ours actually covers both emergency medicine residency programs affiliated with Harvard Medical School, as well as the myriad of other residency programs that we offer. But one of the things that makes this program unique is the built-in mentorship that comes with the program, the built-in sponsorship that comes along with this program, and opportunities for the trainees students to continue to engage with the program before they come to the program, during the program, and after the program. We have a slew of webinars that we do. Dan's been a victim of 1 or 2 of my webinars and having to participate on them. But we create these opportunities understanding there needs to be a longitudinal investment in individuals, not just if we give them an opportunity for 1 month, maybe they'll come to our program. The other thing that we do is the Harvard Showcase, Residency Showcase. And as you can see, there's a bunch of individuals in a large auditorium. This clearly happened years ago before we were impacted by COVID. But this is something that we built as an adjunct to our visiting clerkship programming, recognizing that there was a need for longitudinal programming where students can engage with program directors, meet in a less formal environment, and have an opportunity to get to know more about our programs. And I bring these up to show that you all are doing just great work. Make sure that there is value, that these programs are valued within your institution, and it's not for short term. Make sure there is continued engagement. Think about ways you can partner with other residency programs across your institutions. And even if the programs, may be in a competing process, we have 5 internal medicine residency programs affiliated with Harvard Medical School. They all participate in these programs. They all support the programs because they recognize that there is value if one resident comes from a diverse background from any other medical school and comes to one of our residency programs, that they all win. And so that's the mentality that we need to be switching, going from an individual mentality to more of a partnering mentality. And so I will hand it over. You want to talk about this slide?
Yeah, so I think what Alden said is really important, and I think it's even the QI principle. Like, systems are perfectly designed to get the results that they get, right? And in the same way that Alden described the residency program director who made the comment about turning hamburger into steak, the system that he or she designed gets the results, and it's totally predictable. In the same way, when I've spoken to the program director and we've talked about diversity and inclusion and holistic reviews, when he or she has said to me, I just want the best, what do you think they're saying by the best, right? What is the, maybe not as blunt as the comment Alden heard, but I would argue just as egregious, just as awful, and just as impactful, and just as deliberate. Some of the things that we started doing around our program at BMC, and I'm sure other institutions do it as well, is again, systems are designed to get the results. So when our chairs and our chiefs sit down with their bosses, who's the CEO and the dean, they review obviously their department's financial perspectives, their operations, their research, and they also review their education, and they also review all of their DEI efforts. So that IDEA committee, for example, that Alden describes, what are you doing in your department, what are you doing in your division to grow these ideas? What's your action plan look like, and how are you going to be better a year from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now? So we started putting together reports that we provide to all the chairs and chiefs. So I just put an example up of cardiology here. We look at these are all self-reported from the residents and fellows, how they describe themselves in terms of their race and ethnicity, and we show them. We show them. Now, one thing I've learned is that chairs, chiefs, program directors, I'll let you know a little secret. They are horrifically competitive people. So you can leverage that. And I don't mean to say that like I want dermatology stepping on the throat of cardiology to get in a fight with rheumatology to beat up emergency medicine, which we all know wouldn't happen. But I don't even want to set that up. I don't even want to set that up. What I want to do is say, cardiology, what are you doing? What can dermatology learn? How can rheumatology build on what you're doing? Because I think what Alden's point is important, very similar to what he does. Our visiting elective program, it's not department specific, it's GME specific, because to your point, we need the diversity of the people at our organization that take care of our patients. The diversity of the patients should be reflected in the diversity of the staff. And whether that's a dermatologist, a cardiologist, a rheumatologist, emergency medicine, or anything else, we're all trying to do the same thing. So to your point, Alden, you have to track this. You have to look at data. So we provide these reports of our programs so they can see what have you done, where are you, what have you had successes, maybe there's an opportunity there. What can we share as best practices across our various training programs so that we all can learn from each other? Next slide, please. And then I think it's also important, we bring these to the Board of Trustees of the organization. So actually this afternoon is our Board of Trustees quarterly meeting, and I'll be showing them some data around our URI and recruitment. Recruitment obviously being just one piece of the puzzle. I don't mean to say that's, recruiting, we're out, we've done everything we need to do. Obviously there's a lot more we have to do about this. But again, that the board needs to see this is as important as the financial operations of the hospital. This is just as important. It exists at the same level. We need to have goals. We need to know where we are. We need to know what we do differently, and we need to know what we have to do better. And until you get the system where this is as valued as anything else, you're going to struggle. So I think it's all of our work to do, all of my work to do, to make sure that this gets understood, this gets appreciated, this gets acknowledged, and this gets tracked at the exact same levels. All those other important metrics, our ODE around mortality, how many patients did we admit last week, how many operations did we do, and how diverse is our workforce.
So I think these are all very glorious and admirable things, but the truth is there are a lot of struggles to get this done, right? I mean, this is just not happening. So what do you think some of the struggles are in reality?
Starting from med school, recruiting into medical school is
The pathway. Yes, right? Yes. So, the numbers of the amount of UIMs in medical school, I believe black male physicians are at about 2% or less than actually 2%, and black female physicians are around 2%, right? No. So starting from there. And I'll expand upon that. That's often the excuse that people use, right? That's what's enculturated. Well, there are not so many to be able to get them into residency. If you're starting from low numbers to begin with, then where are they? And I will tell you, as someone who has went to a historically black college and university, there are plenty. right? So don't let that be the stopping ground, because often that's the stop of the conversation, that we're all trying to recruit the same group of people, so that's why we didn't get, that's why we didn't match well this year. What are the other struggles?
Financial barriers, lack of sponsorship, not just mentorship, but sponsorship. Trying to get other people invested, like we said earlier, like a lot of people don't think that this is important, so trying to tug at heartstrings doesn't always work. You have to, try to get them involved, or trying to get these people to ascribe value to these things is also difficult as well. So that's another struggle. There's a lot. I can go on.
Yeah, you gave us a lot, but I will tap one of them, and that's funding, right? So a lot of these things are great, but they do take a certain amount of funding. And so where do you get the funding from, right? This day was set up very nicely where we can talk about what the individual emergency physician can do, the residents, the faculty. Then we talked about what the department can do to really be supportive. And now this is where we're talking about what your institutions can do. And that's really where the funding is going to be coming from. It's probably not even going to be coming from solely the department if you're really going to do something that's going to have a lasting impact. You need institutionally to be able to provide funding so that your structure can have some longevity. And so usually that is where you can gather maybe a group of program directors to go to your dean and say, this is why this is important. This is why you need to put some money behind your words. And, I've been quoted on saying this quite a bit, but I stand true to it. There's a difference between appreciating diversity and inclusion and practicing diversity and inclusion. And you should carry that to your individual institutions and challenge them to actually practice what they're saying is quote unquote important to them by putting some money behind their words.
So we spoke a little bit about kind of the recruitment and whether that be the sponsorship, the mentorship, the pathway programs. But the reality, I think, is you can bring people to an organization, but until you change climate, until you change environment, you're chasing a number and you're not helping. Next slide, please. So what can we do as organizational leaders? What can we do as departmental leaders? What can we do as program leaders? What can we do as residents so that we can develop a climate so that everyone can grow, everyone can thrive, and everyone can be their full, complete, and best selves? How do we set up systems so that we can address those things and foster those things? The way that I kind of think about it is really these four pillars that you see here, and there's overlap between all of them, and all of them come together kind of to bring climate. And all of these things really require one thing. They require you to not only talk about diversity and inclusion, but as Teresa said, to actually practice it. And you have to be intentional about it. There is no easy path here. There's no other way to see success. You have to be deliberate, you have to be intentional, you have to value it, and you have to track it. Next slide, please. This slide is a perfect summary of all of the things that Arthur and Rose and everyone else spoke about this morning. All of these things have to be intentional. So all the work that we do, and some of this you can see, I stole stuff that goes on at Downstate and at Harvard and at BMC, and I'm sure I could take many of the same thing from all your institutions. But until we do these things really intentionally and really deliberately, our climate will not change. And that may be a little bit of a pathway program. So for example, we really work to engage our residents in their communities and in the communities that surround BMC. I'll give you a few examples. So there's a barbershop talk, I can't say that quickly, barbershop talk, did it there, group that is black men who go into the high schools and really talk about kind of their experience. How did they get to medicine? What were the opportunities that they saw? How did they either know about it or not know about it? Whether they came from a family where everyone's a doctor or they never knew another black doctor in their lives. How can we meet high school kids where they are and talk about them really around the local communities? And then really around kind of the cultural experiences. So when people come to Boston, for example, there are a lot of unnamed great training programs in Boston. We have a few of them represented here as well. But what are the opportunities It was a joke. Everyone's supposed to laugh right now. What are the opportunities around Boston, both for our residents and fellows, but also for their families, for their spouses, for their kids? Where can they go? Where can they make friends? Where can they learn? Where can they find community? What art exhibits are available? What are the music shows? Where can they get food that is familiar to them and their families, depending on what culture they come from and where they are? How do they get involved? All of those things are really important, and the kind of performative allyship, the community engagement that you guys spoke about this morning, all of those things I think are as important, if not more important, to all the recruitment events, to the subsidized electives. You have to bring people so that when they come here, they can thrive. And I tell a story of, this was years ago as a program director. There was a woman who we interviewed for residency that actually thought she was screaming Boston Medical Center, like screaming from the top of her lungs. We were the right place for her, and I thought she was the right resident for us. And she was a woman of Ethiopian ancestry. And she came to BMC, this was a number of years ago, and she said, "Where are all the people that look like me?" And I realized that I made a mistake. And I did not do a service to her by recruiting her to come to BMC, because we at that time didn't really have the infrastructure to support her so that she could grow, so that she could thrive, so that she could be the best person she could be. And I've thought a lot about this. This was probably close to, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago now. The mistakes that I made and really the disservice that I did for her. So what are the organizational things that we can do, that we can set up to make sure that those things hopefully never happen again? We spoke earlier, excuse me, about some of the work that we have to do, not just within the physician group, but also our small group over here was talking about how do we be leaders not only in the residents, but of nurses, but of our transporters, but of our cafeteria workers, and our physician leaders. So what can we do so that our residents really understand the community that they're coming into and can grow and thrive? Whether that be, for example, microaggression training and really bystander training. So this year, we're going to take about 350 physician leaders. We've done it for our interns already to teach them bystander training and the tools. We're bringing about 350 physician and nursing leaders through bystander training. We're really using them as a pilot group because eventually we've got to get to about 10,000 employees. But really, again, we have to kind of walk the walk, we have to talk the talk. So that some of the examples that people spoke about this morning, the micro and macroaggressions, most of what the residents tell me about that they experience is, for example, Rose, you mentioned a patient making a very racist comment to you this morning. What happens very often is that our residents can sometimes walk out of a room and, did anyone just hear what that patient said? The attending heard it, the nurse heard it, the 3 other residents heard it, the medical student heard it, and guess what? And the patients in the hallway heard it, right? And guess what? No one did anything. No one did anything. So how can we give people the skills and the tools to say, how do we address that right now? How do we confront it? What can we do about it? So that the experience that you have is very, very different. Thanks.
Just a good point that Jeff brings up is not just about recruiting, right? Which is really at the forefront of everyone's mind right now is how do we recruit for diversity and inclusion? Because as we've given examples and we've talked about all morning, you can recruit for numbers, but if you don't have an environment that is conducive for these trainees to thrive, what often actually does happen is that they are unable to complete their training programs, right? So if you look at the rates of individuals who either have to transfer, go on remediation, or not doing well in their training programs, you will see that there is unfortunately a large percentage of UIM trainees that are in that box. And so what can you do in your programs, even before you recruit, even before you talk about bringing people in, how can you make your environment so that everyone can thrive? Not just the UIM trainees, but everyone who identifies as whatever they want to identify as, how can you make them thrive? We talked a little bit this morning about engaging and community engagement. One of the things that we do at Downstate, thankful to our Dr. Desai, who's sitting in the front row here. She was a very high energy resident, I will tell you. She's graduated now, so I can talk about her. But she came to me right after the George Floyd murder and said she wanted to do a die-in on the front lawn of Kings County. Now, I'm not sure if you all have been to Brooklyn, but lying down on the front lawn in the middle of a Brooklyn street is dangerous. And I was just like, she's like, we're going to do this tomorrow. And so I said, well, can you please give me at least 2 days to make sure that you're going to be safe, and at least try to get some support for you to lie down in the front lawn of Kings County. So fast forward, she did not lie down in the front lawn of Kings County, but what we did do was we did have a huge die-in right across the street where we had about 100 employees, faculty, students, and we talked about not only just doing a die-in demonstration, but actually talked about the feelings of what it was like for underrepresented in medicine faculty, students, our patients who are experiencing a lot of not just the micro and macroaggressions that they deal with on a daily basis at the hospital, but they were experiencing it in totality. And on the news, they couldn't escape it and what that felt like and how we needed to take a moment of silence. And so from that energy, there was a lot of pretty much angry energy that existed. And one of the things when I first became DIO is we talked about having a diversity, equity, inclusion house staff council. And while it was one of my things on my to-do list, it didn't actually come into fruition until after this die-in demonstration where we actually took this momentum and actually put it into practice. And some of the things that the Diversity House Staff Council has been able to do is to really allow the residents of all specialties to actually engage with the community, to really feel like they're not just leaders within the hospital, but leaders outside the hospital. So we're doing a voter registration drive where we got the patients to be able to sign up to register to vote or to remind them to vote, and especially in the smaller elections that are not so mainstream, to our food box distribution, to our Health Sciences Academy, and several other things that we got the residents to actually come up with these creative projects, but to support them fully and to fund them as much as we possibly can, even though Smirty wanted me to give much more money. We gave enough money to be able to support their projects and their ideas, and we invested and valued really them as leaders, and we actually acknowledged them as such, so that they got the attention of the president of our institution, they got the attention of our dean, and they really stood out as leaders at our institution. Some of the other things that the group did was to really think about the intersectionality, right? So I'm sure, it seems like I'm probably speaking to the choir here, so we all know what intersectionality is. It's not just difficult to identify in one box, but what if you identify in multiple boxes? What if you are a woman dealing with microaggressions and then you're a woman of color? What if you are an individual that identifies as LGBTQIA+, and then also you're a person of color, right? And so we had a panel talk where we were able to really talk about those feelings. And this panel talk is now expanded to multiple panel talks where we talk about sex trafficking, where we talk about discrimination and hatred against those who are from the AAPI community. And this has really become now a community, a safe space for us to engage with these residents when we can't go into every patient room with them or every conference hall with them. We can't defend them and advocate for them for every microaggression that they experience. But what we can do is to empower them as a community and to tell them it's not right that someone did that to you. It's not right that someone said that to you. And these are the tools that I've used in my lifetime to be able to combat that. And this is really where probably the most important work in diversity and inclusion come. Not just recruiting, but to build safe spaces for these individual trainees so that they grow up to be future Aldens and that they feel empowered to be able to talk about this passionately, their work, and that you can imagine how many other people have now become behind Alden, and they don't realize all the work that he did to create these pathways for his future mentees, right? And so that's truly practicing diversity, equity, and inclusion.
And before we go on, I just want to make one other comment about this intersectionality component that was just made. So one of the things that we hosted at our institution is a dinner for all the Muslim individuals in our community, because we often don't think about religious minorities within our institutions. And so just to have that opportunity it was originally for Muslim students, trainees, and faculty. And what we recognized was, in addition to those individuals, our staff within our institutions didn't necessarily feel supported, didn't have a place, didn't have a community. And just bringing all of those individuals together for an opportunity, originally in person, then ultimately in Zoom, and hopefully back in person this upcoming fall, as a way to bring community and establish relationships to make people feel as if they belong within an institution. And so it's important for us to think about not just the buckets that we're focusing on now for intersectionality, but who else isn't at the table, who else doesn't feel included, who else doesn't feel like they belong within our institutions.
Because when you do work for one group, you're really doing work for all groups. And even those who are in the majority community, there's research has shown that when you have more diversity, equity, inclusion, you make your training programs better for everyone. And so we talk a lot about what the residents do and how the residents have inspired us. And again, in taking on my role as DIO, I felt very empowered because I finally got the power to do some of the things that I wanted to do. And I really felt like the onus should also be on the faculty, right? And so how do we educate the faculty such that they are understanding what it is like to be a resident who is within one of these groups that we're talking about. And so some of the things that we've done in our last two GME-wide faculty development series is that we've talked about and ingrained topics of bias, like the bias in remediation. This is one example. Last year, we had an entire talk, and we were able to, this is actually in February, we were able to invite some pretty big powerhouse speakers to our campus. Dr. Bonnie Mason and Dr. Barbara Ross-Lee. Dr. Barbara Ross-Lee was the first African-American dean of United States Medical School. Dr. Bonnie Mason was the former vice president of diversity, equity, inclusion at the ACGME. She's now at the American College of Surgeons. And we really had some very deep dive talks, one of them given by one of my wonderful former residents, Dr. Stacy Fresh in the background, to talk about what it is like to be a resident who is either a woman, right, dealing with microaggressions, or somebody in all these other groups that we've just talked about pretty much all day. And we talked about the power of language and communication. Again, using real life examples so that our faculty can understand when you make those little slide comments or jokes, what it really means and how offensive it can actually be. We talked about just professionalism in general. One of the speakers actually brought up something that was, she said a quote, and she actually ran it by me before she even talked about it. And she said, "I'm going to say this. Do you think it's okay?" And I'm like, "You're in Brooklyn. It's fine." She's like, how do you get faculty who are unprofessional to recognize and have emotional intelligence to realize you just don't need to be an asshole? And she started off her talk that way, and that let everyone's guard down, right? And she's just like, just don't be an asshole. But we talked about all the ways that you could actually be an asshole. And surprisingly so, I actually thought it was going to be the case, but it's rang true that so many of my faculty came back and asked me for the recording. Can I get the recording where she talks about just not being an asshole? And it's really making it relatable, right? Not chastising, not saying you were wrong because you did this, but getting them to understand why it's important to talk about these conversations and to have these conversations and to really break down the silo. Another thing that we talk about that I don't think is often talked about in these spaces is wellness. It takes a lot, right, to be able to walk through the thickness of racism, sexism, homophobia, microaggressions, macroaggressions, to then again, and this is tying it back to what we talked about in the beginning of our talk, to then again come into work, smile at your patients, say, "Hi, how are you doing?" and to act like you're not carrying all the baggage behind you. It takes a lot. And when we think about this, we need to also incorporate wellness, right? And really making sure that all of our residents, of course, are provided with the good mental health support, but to especially make sure that those who are coming from these groups with all of the upstream issues that they have to carry are also provided with that mental health support. And so that was one of the things that we also did increase at SUNY Downstate, is making sure that we not just do wellness days, which are great, right? The great activities that you can do outside and outdoor and team building, but to actually make sure that the residents had access to mental health providers, which in my city, which I'm sure it's like in all of your cities, it's very difficult to get access to mental health providers. And so that is another aspect that I think is really important when we're talking about this work, that can be done at institutional levels. So that's pretty much it. That's all we have formally in our presentation, but I think what we want to do for the rest of our time period is to have discussions, because I think we've talked about a lot. We've had a lot of topics, and so hopefully we can take this time to talk to one another, to debrief. We want to know how you felt about the topics, maybe take some of the ideas of what you're doing at your institutions. So anyone just start to, to talk, raise your hand and have a chat with us.
aware of any institutional mentorship programs that have been developed that have been successful supporting sort of medicine residents?
So I could speak to that. I was actually going to try and pull up this website, and if as we go on, I'll try and find it for you. But one of the things we recently did at our institution is we gathered the junior faculty from across the affiliate hospitals at HMS, and we just did an orientation and introduction to Harvard Medical School. Well, we did it in a different format than what you would get by sitting through and watching tons and tons of well-streamed videos or whatever it is that your institution uses, and really having heart-to-heart conversations about what it takes to be academic, what it takes to be successful in our institution. And we had individuals come from faculty affairs and from medical education and other senior faculty, and just to be in a space and answer questions. And it was amazing. Once we started to have the conversations, we could start to see where the needs were for the individuals who were listening into that, and where we can be as a support for those individuals in their journey in academic medicine. And so from that conversation has led to us engaging with other well-recognized, nationally established programs. So we aren't trying to reinvent the wheel, because there's tons of other programs that are already out there. And I'll pull it up because I can't remember what the acronym stands for. But there's a program that's out there that many of your institutions are probably already subscribed to as institutional members, where it supports diverse faculty in their professional growth. We also think about what needs to happen from an institutional level, so tailoring our events specific to our institution. We have a barbecue. We have a list of we have a welcome packet that talks about restaurants and churches and places to get your hair cut and all these other things that really break it down and make it simple, so people feel as if they're given a welcome packet when they start within our institution. And then we also have established longitudinal mentorship programs that exist beyond the walls of our institutions. As I mentioned, HMS is sort of this fiefdom type situation where there's multiple hospitals, oftentimes with similar departments. And how do we help people who are at one institution who may be struggling to get support at another institution when they may not have a direct line of communication? And so we put those opportunities in place. But this is us thinking from an institutional level, not thinking from a departmental level. And it really takes people to understand that the goal is to make sure that the faculty feel supported, not the faculty at X institution within X department feel supported. So we're separating ourselves with a couple of layers to make sure that we are providing resources to faculty beyond what can happen at a departmental level. And I'll pull up the website right quick just to tell you.
I think one thing we have found to kind of build on what Alden was saying is that journey from junior high school to senior faculty member is a long one. But when we talk to the residents and fellows, it feels, at least from their perspective, that there are parts of that journey which are more challenging than other parts. When I came to residency at Boston Medical Center, like a white Jewish kid from suburban Massachusetts, I didn't have to worry about feeling welcome. I didn't have to. But a lot of our residents do have to do that. So we've really focused on that growth from medical school to internship. That was kind of the first point. So we set up some cohorts with URIM medical students, now interns, and junior residents and faculty to really help bridge that first, what we thought was kind of the big challenge, and then to continue along that journey so that can grow. So that's really been our focus kind of for the last couple of years, which, at least from our residents and fellows perspective, has been effective and really important to them. I think what Alden describes is really important as well, that whole journey is just, there are lots of challenges associated with it, and we have to be able to support people along the way.
It's called the National Center for Faculty Development and Diversity, and there's hundreds of institutions that are already a part of it, so you can check and see if your institution is a part of it as well. But they talk about strategic planning for career growth, productivity, establishing healthy relationships and work-life balance. They have tons of webinars that people can watch. Trust me, many of your institutions are probably already engaged in this organization as institutional members. I think making this as a resource more known to faculty is probably what just needs to be done, better advertisement.
AMA also has a few leadership programs specific to women, specific to underrepresented in medicine, that if your institution will sponsor faculty members, that's also very important.
As well as the AAMC.
the same thing but on a faculty level. And I guess you're in a new institution, you're a new faculty, you're only 1 year out of residency. How do you kind of get in that critical mass of other faculty members from other departments? How do you get administrative buy-in when you're kind of a relatively new at a new place? You want to bring attention to these topics.
This is a great question, and I'm going to partially punt this to Jeff because we had a conversation about this, about the minority tax and how minoritized individuals are often tasked with the DEI work within institutions. And so how do you get allies or co-conspirators who are, in rooms that you may not be in to actually get support? I think the reality is you have to figure out who are your partners in this work, and then also making sure that you have leadership support. I think one of the things that often happens is we come up with great initiatives, but if it's not on the chair's agenda, if it's not on the hospital CEO's agenda, it sort of dies right there. And so if this is valued by your department chair, if this is something that you've been tasked with, how is that individual actually supporting the work that you're going to do so it can grow to that next level? And then the second question is, who are your allies who don't look like you, who aren't minoritized, who are going to be the ones who are championing the work right alongside of you and saying, look, this work that she's doing is absolutely awesome. We all should be doing this. I'm going to be at the first event. I'm going to be, coming to the committee meetings. Who are those individuals so they can champion the work with you so that you can be more productive?
I think this is my work. I think this is my work to own and my work to do because I think this is, Alden and I think this is a conversation you were speaking to, Alden. The minority tax is a big, big challenge. It's a big challenge for me to figure out how to handle as well in terms of how we do things at BMC. But I think this is my work. I don't have to knock on the door to get in the room. I have the privilege that gets me in the room on day one. So this is our work to do. And my challenge was to take some of that data that I showed and kind of make chairs, make our CEO, make senior leadership, make our C-suite understand how important it was. And I think Teresa said it very well in that there's very good literature that shows when you have a more diverse workforce, whether that be by gender, by race, by ethnicity, by any other angle or any other lens, it is a more effective, it is a more productive, it is a more engaging, it is a more, or has greater vitality. And that's important for all of us to do. So I think to your original point of this is my work to do. Not that I'm cutting everyone out of it saying don't help, but I think, there are challenges and you have to find those allies of who really want to push on this.
I also think that now that many of you are either senior residents, you're going to be graduating, you're junior faculty, recognize your own power in that the work needs to be done at the institution, and for them, their intention may be a checkbox, but feed off of that and say, you need this work done. Now I need you to pay me to do the work. You need the work done. I'm going to need the time to do the work, right? That's how you get them to value it. And then once you become the first, you then pull up others behind you, saying, okay, well, we've done such wonderful programs. I need an assistant. I need a department. I need a division. So that is how, you really help them, and it also helps you. And I think that that's extremely important. And also what Alden said is, you need, two things. If the department you're going into doesn't really value it, you should think whether you want to go into that department. That's just, I've thought about that on many jobs. If this is what I'm hearing at the door, then I don't need to be here because I'm just not going to fit here. And who has time to be feeling the microaggressions all the time at a certain level, right? So that's one thing. The second thing is making sure that not just your chair, but your dean, your CEO finds value in it. And again, you might have to not come from the angle that you want, right? Which is probably the angle that we all want in this room, but the angle that they want. What is it that they need that they can also have fulfilled? And so that you can tackle both things at the same time and then really enculturate into your institution about what this really means and how valuable it can be.
And lastly, for junior faculty in the room, it's really important that you document your work, and whether that's in the form of writing a paper, pulling together some commentary, something along those lines, because that helps you with your career growth. It also sort of establishes you in this space so that you become a known quantity. I mean, as I'm sitting here listening to this conversations throughout the day, this is something that you two should be leading the charge and writing up for us as work that needs to be talked about on a larger level. How do you take a conference like this, turn this into a paper so that it is out there for others who aren't in this room to consume and to be a part of this discussion? And so all of us need to be thinking about how we can document the work that we're doing so that if you have a program that shows success, it could be a model for others across the country.
And I also, you mentioned, I'm going to pick on you a little bit now, especially because she already picked on you. Yeah, exactly. I kind of got that feeling. Don't start with, I was a resident last year and I'm a new attending this year.
Yeah.
You're on the same level as everyone else in that room. And in fact, I'll pick on, you picked on your resident, can I pick on mine too? Jessica was a resident not that long ago. I'd like to think we had a pretty collaborative relationship, worked together. Jessica called me and said, I'm putting this on along with some partners at SAEM. Would you be involved? That's how that works. So she was a resident 9 months ago, 10 months ago, something like that, 11 months ago, whatever it was, a year ago. The growth happens, and walk into the space, fill it up, take advantage of it, and you'll take off.
So I think that's our time. I believe that we have a Q&A session, right, with all the panelists, so we can continue this discussion. So thank you, everyone.